Fighting off a coup takes time. Let me go back. We feel like archaeological exhibits up here, don't we? Let me just go back to that period and I'll relate my story to it, okay? I mean, I live and represent my constituency. I've lived the last 40 years, Hayes and Harlington, which is a West London, multicultural, working class constituency. And for me, for my constituency, the GLC was almost irrelevant, to be frank. Is Bryn Davis here?
Yes.
Yeah, Bryn and I worked at the TUC at the time. He came to see me and said, I'm standing for Ilya. And I said, what a waste of time. And what we used to do in my constituency, we would treat the GLC like the House of Lords. And so anyone who'd done good service in the local area, and it was like almost making them mayor, would send them off to the GLC. Because for us it was almost irrelevant. And our focus was on the constituency in terms of the MP, but also in terms of the local council. But what happened is in 1979, when Thatcher was elected, the next election was the GLC. Now, no matter what the GLC relevance for us was in terms of service delivery, in terms of politics, it became critical because it was the first opportunity to stand against Thatcher. And the first stage of Thatcherism was just emerging at that point in time. And I was to be the agent for my friend Chris Rogers, who was one of our local councillors, and I was going to get him on the GLC, and then I was just going to go back to a quiet life. What then happened was that Chris got elected onto the executive of the CPSA and stood down as the candidate. I'll never forgive it. And then stood down as the candidate, and then there was a faffing around to find who would be the candidate. And they said, basically, John, will you step forward? And I was sort of dragooned into it in that sense. It's like that thing in the Labour Party. If you turn up at enough meetings, if you've got the pen, you become the secretary. And it was like that. And at that point in time, our GLC seat was held by the Tories, so we had to win it back. So I became the candidate by accident, having denounced Bryn as a careerist for going on Ilya and all the rest of it and wasting his time in this form of local government. But it became important to us politically as the first attempt to mobilise the working class against Thatcher and to defeat Thatcher and to demonstrate we could defeat Thatcher and all she stood for, at least within elements of local government. And the theory that was developed at that point in time, some of you will know it, is in and against the state, which is basically the state isn't just a set of institutions, it's a relationship of dominance. And so you went within the state to change the relationship. So you went within the state and you transformed that relationship into a democratic relationship. So that was the theory behind some of us going into the GLC itself and campaigning in that way. We had the election and I got elected. I got elected to GLC. On my first day of the Labour group, I got lost on the way up to County Hall, and I got to the Labour group. This is how prepared I was for the revolution. I got lost on the way up to County Hall, and I was late for the Labour group meeting. At that point in time, I was working for the TUC. I was also a house father of a children's home as well, looking after 8 kids. At that Labour group, there was a divvying up of positions. Livingston took over as leader. It was a bit of a coup, but it was obvious what was going to happen. Bryn became leader of RVA, and people took different. I think I was a junior whip from vice chair planning west, so they really gave me real responsibility and authority. What then happened is that we immediately started. My view was the GLC Labour group was centre right more than centre left, and we had a small majority. So what we had to do then is open up the doors of County Hall and invite people in to get engaged in the policy-making discussions and processes. And that became part of in and against the state. If you went to County Hall at that point in time, every night there would be some form of meeting going on. People would come in. I said all sorts of different things came. I wrote the manifesto in relation to the community sector, the voluntary sector, and I became chair of grants as well and set up the grants regime. And we had all these groups coming in, talking about different issues. In every committee room, there was something going on. People just turned up at county hall, so I want to talk about this. And it was everything from one, you know, the English collector of prostitutes to a bloke who's here, Richard Barbrook and others, the Radio 4, and one bloke who was broadcasting from a tree on Hampstead Heath. And it was unbelievable. And they were robustious meetings. You'd have punch-ups at one end, and others saying, we're pacifists and we're not involved in that, but nevertheless we're still arguing. It was just extraordinary. And the creativity was immense. The creativity was immense. And what came out of that, some of the discussions were phenomenal. To be frank, I hadn't fully understood the equalities agenda up until then. I gave the first grant to a gay organisation. It was the Gay Bereavement Society. And what it was a group of gay men who come together because at that point in time, AIDS was hitting our community. And it was simply to give advice and assistance and support to gay men who'd lost partners, etc. And we gave that first grant to a gay organisation. My God, it was like a bloody tsunami that hit us in terms of the media. It was extraordinary, the vilification that we got. It was just extraordinary. Len described what the media was. There's a heroine who's missing here tonight, who's no longer with us. That's Leslie Hammond, who was one of the stalwart comrades on the GLC, who I miss now. And they hit us, media, and the Evening Standard was appalling. At that point in time, the Irish struggles were continuing on, and it was a tragedy, it was a nightmare. Bombs were going off in our capital city, and we were desperate to try and somehow secure peace. So we were the first people to say we should enter into a dialogue and discussion. And again, the media hit us with that as well. And the irony of it here is that just as we were publicly saying we need, and I was the first person to do it, to say we need this dialogue to try and secure peace, and we were condemned for that, the irony of it is that we now know that Tory government was having those conversations at the same time. And it was extraordinary. And the anger that was provoked as a result of the media was extraordinary. Len mentioned it. In my home, I had windows smashed. I had bottles broken into the sandpit of my children. And I had, at one point in time, I was driving along and there was a clunk and I thought, Christ, my big end's gone. So I drove into a garage and a bloke said, I'll test it. And he said, have you got an enemy? I said, what do you mean? Every wheel nut on all four wheels had been loosened. It was extraordinary. The best one, we woke up one morning and our hall, there was like an inch layer of maggots. Now, I didn't fish at the time. Someone must have sat up all night pouring maggots through our letterbox. And it was just like a stream like that. It was just amazing the antipathy there was whipped up by the media. But what was interesting all through that period, on all the radical policies that we were developing in terms of reducing fares, campaigning on equalities, campaigning basically for a fair grant settlement for London as well, actually what happened was, despite the group initially being centre-right, it welded together the Labour group under Livingston's leadership at that point in time, and we faced down many of the attacks that came upon us. What then happened, the first wave of the GLC policy was to reduce the fares. And as you know, what then happened is Bromley took us to court, and we lost in court, and they forced us to put the fares up. And a group of us, I'd just been to see a play called Can't Pay, Won't Pay by Dario Fo with my mum. And so we launched a campaign, Can't Pay, Won't Pay. A group of us, a number of us, Bryn, myself and others, whereby we said we would not pay the increased fares and we'd mobilise the community. And we had marches throughout London, etc. And what happened was that people would refuse to pay the fare. They'd pay the old fare and they'd hand in a ticket saying, I'm willing to pay the old fare, but I'm not willing to pay the increase. And then what would our strategy was, naive that we were, is that when you did that, you then entered into a democratic debate with those on the bus about whether to do it. We tried to do a deal with the T&G, with Bill Morris at the time, that the bus conductors, we had conductors then, wouldn't kick us off. He wouldn't do the deal. So what happened was that we'd refuse to pay the fare, then have the debate amongst the other passengers. Unfortunately, that was a slight fault in the discussion, because by majority they'd usually kick us off. There was also quite a drawback. Jeremy's brother Piers was I was the secretary of the campaign, Can't Pay, Won't Pay, and Piers ordered 1 million tickets to be printed with my name and number on them. Now what's interesting, lots of people got arrested for refusing to pay. Dave Wetzel, who was our chair, our transport. Livingston backed off and condemned it and cut my telephones off at County Hospital. Actually, I don't blame him because I couldn't answer the bloody phone anyway, to be honest. But then a number of people got arrested for not paying their fares, Dave Wetzel and a whole range of others. I never got arrested, but a guy called Kevin McDonnell got arrested, and so we went to court on the basis it was a wrongful arrest because they got the wrong man. Dave Wetzel turned up at court in a guerrilla suit on the basis that this was a guerrilla action. And they all got fined, basically. But what it did for me, I thought it was really interesting because what it did, it mobilized whole communities in a community campaign. And it introduced a whole new generation to direct action campaign, which I thought actually was an educative experience at the time. What then happened, we introduced a whole range of policies, and to be honest, it was a progressive regime. On housing policies, we had limited housing powers, but we had things like countryside and seaside homes, where the GLC, part of the GLCC and the GLC had built homes outside of London. So if Londoners wanted to retire to the seaside, we would have homes where they could go to, and that would free up properties for families in London. It was extraordinarily progressive. We actually, the fire brigades that we were in control of had wave of cuts year after year. We reinstated it and worked with the FBU, so the FBU became a direct influence on the management of their own service. So there were elements then of workers' power developing within our administration. And that's why they came for us. That's why they came for us, because what we were offering was an alternative to Thatcherism and the first development of neoliberalism in this country. And the reason they came for us is because we were being successful. We were being successful in the efficient management and delivery of public services. But in addition to that, we've been successful in the use of public resources to mobilise people, but also to democratise London. That's why they came for us. Well, I was deputy leader and chair of the Finance Committee. I had the power then to raise the precept to whatever level we wanted. I had the power over business rates, and I also had the power to go to the City of London and borrow on extremely good rates, borrow on the strength of the whole of London. We had to put a money bill through Parliament, so Parliament partly controlled us, but actually we were able to borrow from the City of London at reduced rates, put into a capital fund, and fund virtually, well, everything I think we had ambitions to develop. And as a result of that, to be frank, going from what was initially in our first year, because of the media, one of the most unpopular local government regimes in local government history, by the time we got to 1985, we were one of the most popular. And that's why they had to come for us. They could not stand the fact that we were developing a model of socialism that actually was popular, effective, and was an example to others. And we'd learnt those lessons, a lot of those lessons that we'd learnt to put into administration at the GLC were learned as a result of the experience of Ted and Sharon and others, and Bryn and others in the development of policies in Lambeth. The way that Ted's described it, I'm sure, the way that they came for us was basically to ensure that they controlled our financial powers in every way. So rate capping was introduced. I was one of those ones in the initial discussions that didn't favour not setting a rate. I was one of those that argued that we kept going for as long as possible, but the GLC was in a stronger position than the boroughs themselves because of our financial resources. We could go on for a lot longer than others. But I came to the view in the debate and discussions that we had, interestingly enough, with people like David Blunkett and others, that it was better that we all went together in an act of defiance. And the reason for that is that because we didn't want each individual borough to be picked off one by one. But we also said if we allowed that to happen, we knew what would come. Even if some could survive for quite a while, eventually they would come for our resources, our powers, and would be picked off and destroyed. And it would be the end, to be honest, of a large part of local democracy in this country. So we came together and we would refuse to set a rate, and as you know, on the GLC, a number of us held firm. Livingston and others took fright and supported a rate. It was the most bizarre couple of days I've had for, well, most of their life up until then. And people were breaking down. They were worried about their future careers, their future lives, and of course, we were threatened with surcharge. And the surcharge at that point in time was a serious threat. Ted and Sharon and others went through it. It was some significantly financial penalties, potentially the loss of your home. That destroyed some people's lives, and some people cracked. But there was I think it was 11 of us on the GLC stood firm in solidarity with the boroughs and also with other local authorities. Eventually, the rate was set. Tragic. And that meant the boroughs then, like Lambeth, were left to be picked off one by one. And I was worried at that point in time that it would demoralise the Lambeth councillors. But what happened was, it didn't. In fact, as a result of Ted and Sharon's and others' leadership, it actually gave them an even greater desire for defiance of what was going on. Because what was being said then was right. Of course, the miners' strike was going on at the time, and we were working in solidarity with them. But then, just at the time when we were trying to hold firm, the miners were forced to go back. But all through that, we knew that if Thatcher got her way, destroyed the local government powers that we had, undermined our financial base, we knew what would happen. And we knew it would take over time it would happen. And that's what's happened. They've destroyed large parts of local democracy in this country. They've removed the financial powers from local authorities. They've effectively, in large respects, made local authorities the agents of central government cuts. I'm proud, extremely proud, of all my comrades in Lambeth and elsewhere who stood firm. I'm proud of the 11 in the GLC who stood firm. I think they were heroes and heroines of their time and should be honoured to that effect. What are the lessons? Well, the lessons now are exactly as we're seeing played out within the Labour Party, the Parliamentary Labour Party and the Labour Party at the moment. Because last September, Labour Party members overwhelmingly elected a leader who's a socialist, who was elected on an anti-austerity programme of defying this government and its austerity measures, and at the same time, yes, was bringing forward the policies that were needed to tackle the problems that working class people face in this country. And that's about tackling homelessness by building the council homes that we need, tackling the poverty to make sure we put people back to work on decent rights and protecting them with trade union rights, and also giving our kids a future by ensuring we ensure free education and abolish tuition fees. And all of that as well wrapped up in the night before Chilcot is published by saying never again will a Labour government take this country to war that destroys lives and inflicts such human suffering. Just as the Thatcher and the establishment then could not tolerate the existence of the GLC or Lambeth Council or other Labour councillors defying the neoliberal policies of that government, neither can the establishment tolerate a socialist as the leader of the Labour Party advocating anti-austerity policies and an alternative. That's why this threatened coup is happening at the moment. There's an attempt to destabilise Jeremy Corbyn and his leadership as a result of the policies he's advocating. This has nothing to do with Jeremy and his individual personality or anything like that. This has nothing to do with his electability. He's proven a track record of electability as a result of winning all these by-elections, the local government elections and every mayoral election, and increasing our position within the polls of the last 9 months that he's been. It's got nothing to do with electability, nothing to do with him as an individual. This is an attack on what he stands for. And what he stands for is a socialist future for this country. And that's why it's important, now this coup has failed, that we support him now in maintaining his leadership and then building a mass social movement as the Labour Party to ensure that when we go into the next election, whenever it comes, we elect a Labour government with a socialist leader on a clear programme of anti-austerity, undermining the neoliberal agenda that's been forced upon us in the last at least decade. But in addition to that, ensuring that as a community, we re-democratise local government and every tier of government, giving them back the powers and resources to respond to the needs of their community for which they were elected to democratically represent. And then what does it mean? It means actually what we need to do now is recognise we have a responsibility on all of our individual shoulders. A responsibility to stand in solidarity with Jeremy Corbyn. Solidarity.